This lecture accompanies Chapter 12 of your textbook, Learning to be a Person. We're going to focus on two primary learning-based approaches to personality, behaviorism and social learning theory. These learning-based approaches are in direct opposition to the humanistic model in that these approaches aim to be truly scientific. They emphasize objectivity, observable data, and theoretical reasoning. Also in contrast to humanism, learning-based paradigms focus on the causes of behavior that lie outside the mind and are not particular to a certain individual. This implies that everyone who is put in the same situation should show the same behavior. That said, behaviorists say that we all have unique personalities because we do not get exposed to the same environments. In fact, we all have unique learning histories which make up our personality. Learning, of course, just refers to the change of behavior as a function of experience. Behaviorism is the study of how a person's behavior is a direct result of his or her environment, particularly the rewards and punishments that are in that environment. Funder came up with this mission statement for behaviorists, quote, "We can only know what we can see, and we can see everything we need to know." Basically, according to behaviorists, all knowledge worth having comes from direct public observation. Introspection is not valid because it can't be verified. It's what's in the environment that's important. According to behaviorists, personality is the sum of everything a person does. Notice that this definition of personality does not include anything that cannot be directly observed, like traits or unconscious conflicts. This is because, according to behaviorists, internal processes are not seen as important. We're going to review the three major models of behaviorism very quickly. This should all be review. First, there's habituation. This is the simplest form of learning. Your behavior changes as a result of your experience. Habituation is when your behavior or your responsiveness to something decreases or changes as a result of being repeatedly exposed to that particular thing. In other words, habituation is when there is repeated exposure to something that has a negative or positive effect on you until it no longer has that effect. When we habituate to things, we create a new normal. The second model is classical conditioning. This is the kind of learning in which an unconditioned response that is naturally elicited by one stimulus becomes elicited also by a new conditioned stimulus. In other words, stimuli that occur close together in time will come to elicit the same response, even if one of those stimuli did not do that before. For example, your eyes automatically react to puffs of air by blinking. If the air puffs into your eye are paired with a ringing bell, such that both will eventually elicit blinking, then eventually blinking will happen when the bell rings, whether or not the air puffs happen. And this is classical conditioning. The theory behind operant conditioning, the third model, is that behaviors followed by pleasant outcomes are more likely to be repeated. Behaviors followed by unpleasant outcomes are less likely to be repeated. We refer to these pleasant outcomes as rewards or reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and the unpleasant outcomes as punishment. If someone engages in a certain pattern of behavior, behaviorists would say that those behaviors were reinforced over time. Each time a behavior has a good result, the positive result will increase the behavior's frequency. So according to this framework, personality is formed as characteristics that work become ingrained and other characteristics are dropped because they are not reinforced. Unfortunately, these three models have several shortcomings. Most importantly, behaviorism ignores motivation, thought, and cognition. Findings have been primarily based on animal research. This is another limitation. Some aspects of learning may be more important than humans than they are in animals, so we can only draw certain conclusions from animal research. Behaviorism also ignores the social dimension of learning, even though we learn by watching others. Learning is essentially social, so it's a problem that this is ignored. Finally, organisms are treated as essentially passive. Behaviorists put animals in particular environments with specific rules for which behaviors will and will not be reinforced. But people often seek out environments and change them once they're in those environments. And then the environment acts back on the person after the person has changed the environment. It's much more complicated than behaviorism has led on. Some psychologists, for good reason, suspected that behaviorism wasn't telling the whole story. One of these psychologists was Wolfgang Kohler, a German scientist who studied chimpanzees, and this was the beginning of social learning theory. Kohler would set up puzzles for chimpanzees, such as hanging a banana out of reach. Then he would observe these chimpanzees, and he would see that when they were figuring out puzzles, they did more than just learn from rewards. They actually developed insight. And he could tell this because there would be these sudden changes in behavior that implied that they suddenly began to understand the situation. I have posted a video of these puzzles for you to see on iLearn. Once behaviorists began to incorporate the importance of insight, this is where we move away from classical conditioning or operant conditioning and more towards social learning theory. Social learning theorists say that the ways people think, plan, perceive, and believe are important parts of learning and therefore are important to personality. One of the earliest social learning theory models of personality was called expectancy value theory. What do we mean by expectancy? This is the belief about how likely it seems that a behavior one engages in will lead to goal attainment. And it proposes that the belief is what causes action or inaction, not the reward or reinforcement. This is very different from classical behaviorism, in which the actual reward is what is important. Expectancy value theory says that behavioral decisions are determined by the presence or size of the reward and the beliefs about whether that reward is likely to be attained. So even if a reward is very attractive, you're not likely to pursue it if you know your chances of success are slim. And even if a reward is not particularly desirable, if the chances of getting it are good enough, you might be more motivated. This is what expectancy value theory proposes. Expectancies can be specific or general. A specific expectancy is a belief that a certain behavior at a certain time and place will lead to a specific outcome. A generalized expectancy includes general beliefs about whether anything you do is likely to make a difference. Generalized expectancies have been found to vary across individuals. We refer to generalized expectancy also as locus of control. Some people believe they have very little control over what happens in their lives, and this is said to be an external locus of control. They believe the control is outside of themselves. People who believe they have a lot of control over what happens to them in their lives are said to have an internal locus of control. A locus of control can be general, but it can also be domain specific. So you might have an internal locus of control with regard to your academics, but a more external locus of control with regard to your dating relationships. Bandura's social learning theory builds directly on Rotter's theory in that it emphasizes the social nature of learning and the ways people interact with situations. It also slightly changes the emphasis on expectancy. Bandura focused on efficacy expectations. That is, one's belief that one can perform a given goal-directed behavior at all. The difference is Rotter focused on the likelihood of success if something is done, and Bandura focused on the likelihood of being able to do something in the first place. Bandura believed that feeling able to do something is highly influenced by your overall level of self-efficacy as well as your self-concept. Things like ability level and attractiveness go into one's self-concept. Bandura's theory has important implications for behavior change. Research based on Bandura's theory shows that you can change behavior by changing efficacy expectations. And you do this by either watching someone else accomplish the behavior through modeling or forcing yourself to do the behavior. If the belief is changed, then the behavior will also change. One of the most influential aspects of Bandura's theory has been its emphasis on observational learning, which is learning a behavior vicariously by seeing someone else do it, also known as modeling. This is very different from classic behaviorism. Bandura famously demonstrated the observational learning process through his Bobo doll experiments. I won't spend time talking about it here. I've posted a great video on iLearn. It's about 5 minutes long and reviews these important studies. A third innovation in Bandura's social learning theory is reciprocal determinism, which is an analysis of how people shape their environments. Classic behaviorism and even Rotter saw the environment acting on people as if people are passive. Bandura saw this as an oversimplification. Reciprocal determinism emphasizes three things. First, that people choose environments and seek out social situations. Second, these social situations are changed by the fact that the person is in them. And third, social situations and behavior interact within the person to give rise to personality. The final learning model we'll cover here is the Cognitive Affective Personality System, or CAPS. In this model, Walter Mischel built on social learning theory by adding cognition. He suggested that people do more than behave, observe, and expect. They also think. Mischel's theory is based also on the humanist construct of personal construals. These are the idiosyncratic ideas about the world that guide each individual's perceptions and thoughts. Mischel's CAPS theory combines two important ideas. One, that these personal construals are all important, and two, that there is a cognitive system operating within each person where thoughts proceed simultaneously on multiple tracks that occasionally intersect. And so many things are happening in one's mind at the same time, and we're only aware of some of them. He proposed that thoughts, feelings, and behavior, our personality, are the product of compromises between these different cognitive processes. CAPS has a very specific definition of personality. In this paradigm, personality is a stable system that mediates how an individual selects, construes, and processes social information and generates social behaviors. And the most important aspect of any system is the fact that it interacts with the other systems. Another key idea that Mischel put forward is what he calls if-then contingencies. These refer to a repertoire of actions that are triggered by particular stimulus situations. So if someone cuts you off in traffic, you might slow down. This is an if-then contingency, a way that you would generally respond to this general stimulus of someone trying to cut you off. Your friend, when they get cut off, they might speed up. So they have a different if-then contingency. According to Mischel, each person has a unique pattern of contingencies, and these he referred to as each person's behavioral signature. We'll end here with the contributions and limitations of learning approaches to personality. Learning approaches contributed quite a bit to the field of personality psychology. They made great strides in establishing psychology as an objective science. These approaches were the first psychological models of personality that emphasized tight theoretical reasoning, careful experimental design, and the importance of backing up statements with data. There were also a lot of limitations to learning models. Therapies that are based on learning principles are helpful for some, but it's unclear whether these behavioral therapies are generalizable and long-lasting. People are more complicated than learning theories acknowledge. Finally, there really was an underappreciation of the degree to which the characteristic ways people think can cause them to respond differently to the same situation.